Hey, welcome to the channel. Let's explore what the book has to offer. Oh, and keep an eye out for small notes that will pop up on your screen at regular intervals, perfect for quick takeaways and jotting down some life-changing insights. So, let's jump right in and see what this book can teach us.
Welcome to our deep dive. Today it's all about the power of deep work. You sent us some really interesting stuff, including excerpts from Cal Newport's deep work.
Yeah.
And a few articles about open offices, too. So clearly you're all thinking deeply about focus in the modern world.
Absolutely.
Get ready to unlock some serious concentration, because we're going to distill all of this into key insights that can help you level up your productivity.
That's right. We're going to explore why deep work is becoming so valuable in this age of AI and automation, and how you can train your mind to resist all those tempting distractions that are constantly vying for your attention.
Okay, I gotta admit, the whole AI thing has me a bit puzzled. It seems like everyone's talking about machines taking over jobs.
Right.
So where does intense focus even fit into all of that? It almost feels like a contradiction.
Yeah, well, what's fascinating is that while automation is definitely changing the landscape of work, deep work is actually becoming more valuable, not less,
Okay.
for certain segments of the workforce.
Interesting, because one of the articles you sent mentioned how open offices are designed to encourage collaboration.
Yeah.
But wouldn't that make deep work even harder?
That's a great point.
Mm-hmm.
And it really highlights the tension between these two trends. Open offices are great for brainstorming and quick communication,
Yeah,
but they can be a nightmare for focused work.
right.
And Newport definitely has some strong opinions on that, which we'll get into later.
Okay.
But first, let's go back to the value of deep work in the age of AI. Think of it this way. As machines get better at those routine, repetitive tasks, the skills that really set us humans apart, creativity, complex problem solving, the ability to learn quickly, those become even more valuable.
That makes a lot of sense. It's like in Deep Work, Newport gives that example of Nate Silver, the election forecaster.
Oh, yeah.
He uses all these sophisticated algorithms to analyze tons of data, something a computer can obviously do incredibly well. But it's Silver's ability to interpret that data, see the bigger picture,
Right.
and make those accurate predictions that makes him so valuable.
Exactly. He's not just passively receiving information from the machines. He's actively engaging with it.
Yeah.
He's using his deep work skills to extract insights and knowledge that the machines themselves can't provide.
And there's that other example from the book, the programmer David Heinemeier Hansson.
Oh, yeah.
He's considered a total rock star in his field.
He is.
And it's his ability to just crank out incredible code at an elite level that sets him apart.
Right. And this idea of superstars thriving is a key trend.
Yeah.
Newport highlights. It's not just about keeping up with technology. It's about being the absolute best at what you do. The people who can really go deep, who can master complex skills and create something truly valuable.
Yeah.
They're the ones who will stand out in this new economy. So you're seeing how deep work isn't just about surviving AI. It's about thriving alongside it. It's about becoming indispensable.
Okay, I'm starting to see how crucial deep work is going to be.
Yeah.
But here's where things get a little tricky, right? Newport argues that deep work is actually becoming rarer. At the same time, it's becoming more valuable.
Yeah.
That feels kind of counterintuitive. Like, shouldn't we all be doubling down on focus if it's so important?
It is a paradox, absolutely. And a lot of it has to do with how our work culture is evolving, or maybe even devolving.
Yeah.
We're constantly bombarded with distractions.
Right.
And like you pointed out, open office plans are a part of that. Then there's instant messaging, the expectation of being constantly available, social media.
Yeah.
All these things keep us connected,
Aye.
but they also make it incredibly difficult to truly focus deeply on anything.
So it's like we're creating a work environment that almost sabotages the very thing we need most.
Yeah.
And this is where I get a bit confused.
Yeah.
Why are companies embracing these practices if they're hindering the kind of deep work that's so valuable? It seems like they'd be shooting themselves in the foot.
It's a great question, and Newport offers a few explanations. One of them is what he calls the metric black hole. Essentially, it's tough to measure the direct impact of deep work, so it often ends up undervalued.
Yeah.
You can easily track things like how many emails someone sends or how many meetings they attend, but how do you quantify the value of the thinking that goes into, say, a brilliant strategy document or a game-changing product design?
So it's easier to focus on what's easily measurable. That busyness we talked about earlier, even if that busyness doesn't actually lead to anything truly valuable. It's like that old saying, if you want something done, ask a busy person.
Right.
But are they actually productive or just really good at looking busy?
Precisely. And this is then compounded by what Newport calls the internet-centric technopoly. It's this idea that our culture is so obsessed with the internet that we just assume constant connectivity is a good thing without really questioning whether it's actually serving us.
Remember that article you sent about the New York Times pressuring its journalists to be constantly active on social media?
Yeah, and it made me think of that anecdote from the book where Newport sees a refrigerated supply chain truck with a like us on Facebook graphic.
Oh, it just highlights how pervasive this internet-centric thinking has become. We assume being online all the time is inherently good, even in industries where it doesn't necessarily make sense.
It raises an important question. If deep work is so valuable, but also becoming so rare, how do we shift our thinking and our habits to embrace it more fully? How do we resist the pull of the shallows and create the space for deep work to flourish?
Well, that's what I'm hoping we can unpack next. Newport offers some pretty compelling arguments from both a neurological and philosophical perspective for why we should all be striving for more depth in our lives.
And he doesn't just stop at the why. He gives us some really practical strategies for the how. And that's where things get really interesting.
Exactly. So let's dive into those strategies and see how they might apply to your work and life.
Yeah.
Are you ready to get deep?
So let's start with that neurological angle. Winifred Gallagher, a science writer who really dove into the connection between attention and happiness, found that focusing on the positive things in your life, instead of getting bogged down by distractions and negativity, actually leads to a more fulfilling experience. She even used this approach to cope with a cancer diagnosis, which is incredible.
Wow, that's powerful stuff. It really speaks to how much control we have over our own well-being just by choosing where to direct our attention.
Right.
And it makes me think of something else Newport talks about, that feeling of being constantly bombarded by shallow information, especially in our inboxes.
Right.
It's like we're drowning in emails, messages, notifications, all these tiny things that chip away at our focus and create this sense of overwhelm.
Exactly. And that's where the work of Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi comes in.
Oh, yeah.
You might be familiar with his research on flow. Those moments where you're so absorbed in an activity that you completely lose track of time. Turns out deep work is actually a really powerful way to tap into those flow states, which not only boost productivity, but also contribute to a more meaningful life.
Oh, I definitely experience that when I'm writing. It's like everything else just fades away and I'm completely immersed in the word. But Newport also makes a philosophical argument for depth, right?
Right, and it's a good one. He draws on the work of Hubert Dreyfus and Sean Kelly, who explored this concept of craftsmanship as a path to meaning.
Okay.
Especially in a world where we're constantly bombarded with information and expected to create our own sense of purpose. Craftsmanship, they argue, allows you to connect with something larger than yourself, something that provides a sense of order and purpose in the chaos of the modern world.
So it's not just about being productive for productivity's sake, it's about finding real meaning and fulfillment in the work itself.
That's right.
Which brings us to Newport's first rule: work deeply. And this is where he introduces that wild concept of the eudaimonia machine, a building specifically designed to create the ideal environment for deep work.
It's an interesting thought experiment.
Yeah.
This machine has different rooms for different types of work.
Okay.
Each designed to minimize distractions and encourage deep focus. There's a deep work chamber that's completely soundproof, for example.
Oh, wow.
And other rooms designed for collaboration or contemplation.
Wait, a whole soundproof chamber just for deep work? That sounds amazing.
Right.
But also maybe a bit extreme for most people. I mean, I don't think my landlord would be too happy if I started building soundproof chambers in my apartment.
Yeah, probably not. But even if we can't all have our own eudaimonia machines, the principles behind its design are still really valuable.
Okay.
It highlights the importance of having a dedicated space for deep work, even if it's just a corner of your desk or a specific chair in your home office.
Right.
And it also emphasizes the power of rituals and routines, setting up your space in a certain way, having a specific drink you always have before you start working, things like that, to signal to your brain that it's time to focus.
So it's about creating the right environment, both physically and mentally, to support deep work.
Yes.
But then there's the question when to do it right.
Right.
And that's where Newport lays out those 4 different philosophies for scheduling deep work: monastic, bimodal, rhythmic, and journalistic.
Exactly. Each philosophy has its own advantages and disadvantages. And finding the right one for your personality and work style is key. The monastic philosophy, as the name suggests, is all about eliminating distractions as much as humanly possible.
Yeah.
Newport gives examples like Donald Knuth, a computer scientist,
Okay.
Neil Stephenson, a science fiction author, who basically went completely off the grid to focus on their work.
Wow. Going full hermit mode for deep work. That's pretty hardcore.
It is.
I admire their dedication, but I think I need at least a little bit of human interaction to stay sane.
Right. That level of isolation definitely isn't for everyone. And that's where the bimodal philosophy comes in. It's about alternating between periods of intense monastic-style deep work and periods of high engagement with the outside world.
Hmm.
Carl Jung, the founding psychologist, is a great example. He'd retreat to his isolated cabin for stretches of focused writing, but then return to his busy social life in Zurich.
So it's like finding a balance, a rhythm between the deep and the shallow. I like that.
And that leads us nicely into the rhythmic philosophy, which is all about establishing a consistent daily routine that includes a set time for deep work.
Okay.
It's about making deep work a habit, like brushing your teeth or going to the gym.
It's like that saying, what gets scheduled gets done.
Yes.
If you make deep work a non-negotiable part of your day, you're way more likely to actually stick to it.
And finally, there's the journalistic philosophy, which is all about being able to switch into deep work mode whenever the opportunity arises.
Right.
Think of journalists who can crank out a perfectly crafted article in the middle of a chaotic newsroom.
Yeah.
Walter Isaacson, who wrote that amazing biography of Steve Jobs, is a great example of this.
Oh, yeah.
He wrote his first book in short bursts throughout the day, squeezing in writing time whenever he could.
Okay, that's impressive. It takes some serious mental agility to be able to just flip that switch and go depth whenever you have a few spare minutes.
It definitely takes practice.
Yeah.
And speaking of practice, let's not forget the grand gesture. Sometimes, to really commit to deep work, we need to make a significant change to our environment or routine. Like, remember Bill Gates would famously take think weeks, where he'd isolate himself in a cabin to focus on big picture thinking.
Oh, yeah.
Or Peter Shankman flying all the way to Tokyo just to get away from distractions and finish a book manuscript.
Okay. Those are definitely grand gestures, but I get it. Sometimes you need to shake things up and create a sense of novelty to signal to your brain that this is important,
Right.
that it deserves your full attention. It makes me think about that article you sent about those companies that experimented with 4-day work weeks.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe that could be considered a grand gesture, too, a way to create more space for deep work.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
A 4-day work week could totally be a grand gesture for a company. And there are plenty of individual examples, too. Maybe it's booking a cabin for a weekend, writing retreat,
Yeah.
or even just turning off all your notifications and committing to a full day of focused work on a specific project. The key is to find what works for you.
So we've covered why deep work is valuable, why it's becoming rarer, and some different approaches to scheduling it into your life. But I think the big question a lot of people have is, how do you actually train yourself to get better at it? It's one thing to block off time on your calendar for deep work, but it's a whole other thing to actually be able to focus deeply during that time.
You're absolutely right. And that's where Newport's second rule comes in. Embrace boredom.
Oh.
It sounds counterintuitive, but
Yeah.
he argues that our constant exposure to distractions is actually weakening our ability to concentrate.
Oh, I feel that in my bones. It's like every spare second is filled with scrolling through Instagram or checking email. I have to force myself to just sit and do nothing sometimes.
And that's exactly the problem. We've become so accustomed to having constant stimulation that we've forgotten how to just be.
Okay.
Newport uses the example of Orthodox Jews studying the Talmud. They engage in this incredibly intense, focused study for hours every day. And in doing so, they train their minds to resist distractions and concentrate deeply. He tells the story of this guy, Adam Marlin, who came to Talmud study later in life
Okay.
and was just blown away by the intellectual stamina and focus of those who had been practicing this mental discipline for years.
It's like any skill, the more you practice, the better you get. Just like you train your body at the gym, you need to train your mind to focus. But knowing that doesn't necessarily make it easier.
Of course not. And that's why Newport offers some concrete strategies for embracing boredom and strengthening your ability to focus.
Okay, I'm all ears. Let's hear those strategies.
Mhm.
So these Orthodox Jews studying the Talmud, they're basically deep work masters. I'm guessing they don't have smartphones buzzing every 5 seconds.
Right.
But for the rest of us, mere mortals, how do we even begin to cultivate that kind of focus in a world that's designed to distract us?
Right. It's not easy. Newport actually cites some research by Clifford Nass that shows how chronic multitasking, that constant switching between tasks that we all do, actually rewires our brains, making us more susceptible to distractions and less able to focus. It's like we're training our brains to be scattered and reactive instead of focused and deliberate.
Ugh, that's a little scary, but also not surprising. I feel like I'm always juggling a million things at once, and it's exhausting. So how do we break free from this cycle of distraction and reclaim our ability to focus? Newport has some strategies, right?
He does, and this first one is pretty simple, but also kind of mind-blowing. Don't take breaks from distraction. Instead, take breaks from focus.
Okay, I'm intrigued. That sounds almost backwards. Explain it to me.
It's about shifting your mindset. Instead of viewing distraction as the default state and focus as the exception, we need to flip the script. Deep work should be our baseline, and distraction should be a deliberate scheduled break.
So it's like giving yourself permission to check your phone or browse the internet, but only during designated times. Almost like setting office hours for distractions.
Exactly. Newport calls them internet blocks. You schedule specific times in your day when you allow yourself to go online and engage with those distractions. But outside of those blocks, you're completely offline and focused on your work.
That sounds really challenging, but also incredibly freeing. It's like taking back control of your attention instead of letting it be controlled by those pings and notifications. I'm definitely going to try that.
Right.
What are some of the other strategies?
Another one is work like Teddy Roosevelt. It's about embracing those super concentrated work sprints to get stuff done in a limited time frame. Roosevelt was known for his insane energy and productivity, and he apparently accomplished this by working in focused bursts. He dedicated himself completely to a task for a set period, eliminate all distractions and just power through it. Then you take a break, recharge, and move on to the next thing.
Okay, that's pretty badass. I love that image of Teddy Roosevelt just bulldozing through his to-do list. It's like channeling your inner Rough Rider.
Exactly, and it can be really effective. When you know you only have a limited time to work on something, you tap into a deeper level of focus and get more done in a shorter period.
Okay, I'm adding work like Teddy Roosevelt to my list of things to try. What else have we got?
This next one's one of my favorites. Meditate productively. It's about using those times when you're not actively working, like when you're taking a walk or doing chores for productive meditation, focusing your mind on a single, well-defined problem related to your work.
Ooh, I love this one. Newport talks about working out chapter outlines for his book while on walks, right? I actually do something similar when I'm stuck on a tricky part of a script. It's amazing what your subconscious can come up with when you give it space to breathe.
It is. And by actively focusing your attention on the problem during those downtime moments, you can bring those insights to the surface and make real progress.
Yeah.
It's like you're priming your brain for deep work, even when you're not technically working.
Okay, last but not least, you mentioned that Newport has a slightly more unusual strategy for embracing boredom.
He does. It's memorize a deck of cards.
Wait, what? How does memorizing cards help you focus? That sounds more like a party trick.
It might sound strange, but memory training, especially the kind used by those mental athletes who can memorize entire decks of cards in minutes, can actually improve your working memory and boost your ability to focus. Newport tells the story of Daniel Keeloff, who struggled in school because of ADHD, but then became a memory champion and super successful academic through memory training.
Wow. So by training your brain to remember all that complex information, you're actually strengthening the neural pathways that support focus and concentration.
Exactly. It's like building mental muscle. And it can be surprisingly fun. There are tons of techniques and resources out there for memory training, and it can be a really engaging way to challenge yourself and sharpen your focus.
Okay. You've officially convinced me I'm adding Memorize a Deck of Cards to my deep work toolkit. So we've covered a lot of ground: the value of deep work, the challenges of distraction, different scheduling philosophies, strategies for embracing boredom, and even memory training. But we haven't talked about what I think is the biggest distraction of all the internet. How do we manage that beast?
That's where Newport's third rule comes in. Quit social media.
Whoa, okay, that's a bold statement. I think a lot of people would struggle with that one. Are you saying we should all just delete our social media accounts and become digital hermits?
Not necessarily. He's not saying we need to go completely off the grid, but rather that we need to be more mindful and intentional about how we use these network tools, especially social media. He talks about the any benefit approach to network tool selection, which is basically where you justify using a tool simply because you can identify any possible benefit, no matter how small.
Oh, I'm so guilty of this. I'll tell myself that I need to be on Twitter to stay informed, but really I'm just scrolling through endless memes and getting sucked into pointless arguments.
And that's the problem, right?
Yeah.
We focus on those tiny potential benefits, but we ignore the real costs of these tools, the time, attention, and energy they drain from us.
It's like we're so blinded by the shiny distractions that we forget what we're actually sacrificing. So how do we break free from that cycle?
Newport suggests shifting to what he calls the craftsman approach to tool selection. It's about evaluating these tools with the same careful consideration and skepticism that, say, a skilled woodworker would apply to their tools. Are these tools actually helping me achieve my goals, or are they getting in the way?
He uses the example of a farmer who decided not to buy a hay baler because he felt it would ultimately damage the health of his soil, even though it would make certain tasks more efficient. It's about thinking long term and making sure your tools align with your values.
Exactly. And he offers some practical strategies for applying this approach to our digital lives. One is to apply the law of the vital few to your internet habits.
Yeah, okay.
Remember the 80-20 rule. 80% of our results come from 20% of our efforts. The same principle applies to our internet use.
So it's about identifying the small number of online activities that actually contribute to our success and happiness and ruthlessly eliminating the rest.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Instead of mindlessly scrolling through Facebook for hours, maybe you choose to spend that time having a meaningful conversation with a friend or working on a project that really excites you.
Quality over quantity. I
Oh.
like it.
Another strategy is to quit social media for 30 days. It's about conducting a packing party for your social media accounts. Like you're literally packing them away in a box and abstaining for a month to see how it affects your life.
I've heard of people doing this, and it always seems so drastic. But I guess it's a great way to hit the reset button on your relationship with social media. By taking a break, you can really see if you actually miss it and whether it's truly adding value to your life.
And finally, Newport suggests don't use the internet to entertain yourself. This one's tough, but I think it's super important. It's so easy to get sucked into that black hole of low-quality online entertainment, endless scrolling YouTube spirals. You know the drill.
Oh, believe me, I know the drill. It's like my brain is wired to seek out those quick hits of dopamine, but I know it's not really serving me.
And that's the key, right? It's about becoming aware of those patterns and making a conscious choice to engage with higher quality forms of entertainment. Instead of spending hours binge-watching Netflix, maybe you read a book, go for a walk, or pursue a hobby.
So it's about being intentional about how you spend your leisure time and making sure your entertainment is actually enriching your life, not just numbing you out. Okay, we've talked about embracing boredom and quitting social media. What's next?
Newport's final rule is drain the shallows. This is all about recognizing the hidden costs of all that shallow work. We do the emails, the meetings, the busy work, and reclaiming that time and energy for the deeper, more meaningful work. He highlights examples like companies that have implemented a 4-day work week or dedicated a whole month to deep work projects.
It makes you realize how much of our time is taken up by tasks that aren't really moving the needle. And that article you sent about those companies experimenting with shorter work weeks, they found that people were actually more productive when they had fewer hours in the office, which is pretty amazing.
It is. And while not everyone can just ditch their job and become a deep work guru, the principle of draining the shallows is still incredibly valuable.
So how do we actually do it?
Newport offers a few strategies. One is to schedule every minute of your day. This sounds intense, but it's basically about planning out your days in advance to reduce the amount of time you waste on those reactive, shallow tasks.
By having a clear plan for how you're going to spend your time, you're less likely to get sucked into that vortex of email and social media, right?
Exactly. It's about being proactive instead of reactive. Another strategy is to quantify the depth of every activity. Newport suggests using something he calls the college graduate test.
Ooh, I like this one. How does it work?
Basically, you ask yourself, how long would it take to train a recent college graduate to complete this task? If the answer is not long, then it's probably a shallow task that doesn't require your unique skills and expertise.
That's such a good way to cut through the noise and identify the work that really matters. And it would probably make you feel a lot better about delegating some of those shallower tasks, knowing that someone else can handle them just as well as you can. What else?
He also suggests ask your boss for a shallow work budget. This one might be tricky depending on your work situation, but it's basically about negotiating a limit on the amount of time you dedicate to shallow work each week.
That's a bold move. But it would force you to be much more intentional about how you spend your time and really prioritize those deep work tasks. I love it. What's the last strategy?
The final one is finish your work by 5:30. This isn't about rushing through your work, but about embracing what Newport calls fixed schedule productivity.
So it's about setting a firm deadline for ending your workday and then working backward to find the most efficient way to get everything done within that time frame. I actually tried this for a while, and it was amazing how much more focused I was during the day, knowing that I had a hard stop.
It's a game changer.
Yeah.
It helps you protect your evenings for rest, relaxation, and all those things that are important to you outside of work. And it can actually make you more productive during a day because you know you have a limited amount of time to get things done.
Plus, you get the satisfaction of closing your laptop at a reasonable hour and knowing that you've accomplished everything you needed to.
Okay, so we've covered a ton of strategies for draining the shallows. Any final tips before we wrap up?
Newport also offers a few tactical tips for becoming harder to reach, especially when it comes to email. One is to make people who send you email do more work. You can do this by implementing sender filters. Basically, people have to answer specific questions about their request before their email even reaches your inbox. It's like a little gatekeeper for your attention. Love it. It sets the expectation that your time is valuable and that you're not going to waste it on poorly thought out requests.
He also suggests do more work when you send or reply to emails. Make sure your messages are clear, concise, and actionable.
Front-loading the effort so you're not caught in a back-and-forth email chain for days on end makes sense.
And finally, and perhaps most importantly, embrace the power of don't respond. It sounds simple, but it can be incredibly freeing. Not every email requires a response.
You mean it's okay to just ignore some emails? That feels almost revolutionary.
It can be. By being more selective about which messages you respond to, you reclaim a ton of time and energy. And sometimes simply ignoring an email is the most effective way to deal with it.
So we've reached the end of our deep dive into deep work. I have to say I'm feeling pretty inspired, but also a little overwhelmed by all the possibilities.
It's a lot to take in, for sure. Remember, you don't have to implement everything at once. Pick one strategy or tactic that resonates with you and start there. Even small changes can have a big impact on your ability to focus and do your best work.
And here's a final thought to leave you with. Think back to a time when you were completely absorbed in an activity, maybe even lost in that flow state. What was it about that experience that made it so compelling? How can you bring more of that focused energy into your work and life?
This deep dive is just the beginning. Now it's your turn to put these ideas into action.
Thank you for listening to us. Please kindly like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Also, please let us know which book you would like us to summarize.